Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Martin MacNeill. Michelle Marie Summers, a well-beauty queen and part-time model from California. She had always cherished two things, her family and God. At 21, she met Martin, a 22-year-old man, at an event for Mormon singles. Michelle believed he was the man of her dreams, but her parents did not agree with that. They disapproved of his bold, abrasive personality and felt uneasy around him, wishing that their beloved daughter would not date him. Like Romeo and Juliet, her parents' disapproval only made Michelle find her relationship with Martin more attractive. While her parents saw Martin as a narcissist, she believed he was an ambitious man who had overcome a difficult childhood. When he threatened to end his life if she left him, she agreed to marry him. Then, they eloped and secretly wed in 1978. Their honeymoon was short-lived. Within 6 months of their marriage, Martin was sent to prison, leaving Michelle to spend most of her time alone. Before meeting her, he had forged checks totaling $35,000. In addition to typical items like jewelry and clothing, he bought a grandfather clock, 60 pairs of socks, a refrigerator, and strangest of all, he bought enough chocolate-covered cherries to last a year. He got the idea for check forgery from a TV program about check fraud, which claimed it could be done in 60 minutes. Martin thought he could do it even faster. Sadly, forging checks was just one of Martin's many lies. He almost completely made up the story of his life. He had ambitious plans for his future, despite a difficult childhood. While many young men pick up the guitar to join rock bands and impress women, he chose a different route. He aimed to gain wealth and recognition by becoming a doctor. However, his poor academic record posed an obstacle to his dreams. Undeterred, Martin applied his usual tactic, which was to lie. He first used a fake certificate to enroll in a medical college in Mexico. After studying there for 6 months, he forged more certificates and was accepted into a medical university in California. His plan worked, and in 1984, he officially became a doctor. By that time, he had also taken note of the many attractive women among his patients. Later, when Martin realized the respect people had for lawyers, he decided he wanted a law degree as well. Once again, he pursued this goal dishonestly. While working at the Brigham Young University Clinic, he falsified his application to gain admission to the university's law school. He has been a chiropractor for many years, but if his fake qualifications are exposed, he would have faced severe criminal charges. In 1990, he was caught committing fraud and was banned from writing medical bills for 12 years. In 1998, Martin was expelled from the medical center following allegations of sexual harassment, inappropriate behavior, and incompetence as a doctor. However, this did not deter him. In 2000, the governor of Utah appointed he as the chief physician at the Utah State Development Center. On the surface, he appeared composed and normal, but a closer look revealed otherwise. For example, he frequently threatened to end his life. However, whenever someone criticized his actions, he used this threat. In 1994, after being discovered having an affair with one of his patients, Martin threatened to end his own life. In 2000, after his wife, Michelle, discovered he was watching pornography, he threatened to kill her with a meat cleaver. His 14-year-old son had to intervene and take the knife away. 5 years later, he was caught again watching explicit films and once again threatened to end his life. It was also revealed that Martin had multiple relationships with women across the country. 2 of these women, Anna Osborne and Gypsy Willis, were more than just casual lovers. Anna owned a laser appeal clinic and met Martin in 2005 while he was working as a consultant. At the time, Anna was facing a difficult divorce, and Martin offered to act as a mediator between her and her husband. The reason is that he has specialized training in the field of lawyers. After that, Martin and Anna's relationship quickly became intimate. In conversations, he often bragged that with just the right combination of drugs, he could kill people easily, making death look natural, like a heart attack. He even suggested to Anna that she should kill her husband, but she initially thought that he was only joking. As for Gypsy Willis, she is Martin's true love. They met online in November 2005. Martin presented himself as a doctor and lawyer, he impressing she with his intelligence and charm. At the time, Gypsy was a 29-year-old nursing student. He gradually realized that without she, his life would not be perfect. Until then, he thought he had successfully balanced his double life, keeping his affair hidden from both sides. But he was mistaken. In February 2007, Michele grew suspicious. She noticed Martin behaving oddly and decided to check his phone records. She repeatedly saw Gypsy's name and number. So she confronted him about the affair. He admitted to it and promised to end the relationship with Gypsy on one condition: Michele had to work on herself, specifically her appearance. He asked her to have a facelift. At first, she was hesitant. She felt she needed to prepare for the surgery, as she had high blood pressure and wanted to address that first. However, he reassured her that everything would be fine. Reluctantly, she agreed, hoping the facelift might improve their marriage. Then, they met the surgeon, who would perform the surgery. Just moments before Michele was put under anesthesia, Martin pulled the doctor aside and handed him a detailed list of medications to prescribe. He assured the doctor that he would personally oversee Michele's recovery. Trusting Martin's medical expertise, the surgeon agreed without any hesitation. The operation was a success, and the doctor prescribed the medications as Martin had requested. However, these medications were dangerous when combined. The doctor assuming Martin would manage them properly, so he has no reason to worry. On April 3, 2007, Martin brought Michele home from the hospital. She was heavily sedated, her eye was bandaged, and Martin took care of her. Their eldest daughter, 22-year-old Alexis MacNeill, was studying to become a doctor, following in her father's footsteps. On April 10, 2007, she returned home for the holidays and to care for her mother, Michele, who was recovering from surgery. She immediately noticed that her mother looked unwell and wanted to help. But Martin refused to let her. He asked Alexis to leave the bedroom, insisting that he would take care of Michele himself. The next morning, Alexis found her mother in a state of exhaustion, lethargic like a zombie. She confronted her father, Martin, and he admitted he might have given Michele too many pills. He explained that Michele had vomited, so he gave her additional doses. Shocked that her father, a doctor, was mishandling her mother's medication, she insisted on taking over the responsibility of administering the pills. In private, Michele confided in Alexis, asking to touch each pill before taking it. With her vision obscured by bandages, she relied on the unique markings on the pills to identify them. Michele revealed she didn't trust Martin, believing he was up to something sinister. She even pulled Alexis close and said that if anything happened to her, Martin will be the one to take responsibility. Michele recovered quickly, allowing Alexis to rest and continue her studies in medical school. The last time she spoke to Michele on the phone was at 8:45 a.m. on April 11, 2007. When Alexis asked Michele how she felt about Martin, Michele responded happily, saying he was sweet and loving. She reassured Alexis there was nothing to worry about. However, Alexis unable to shake a sense of foreboding that something was wrong. During the morning of April 11, 2007, Martin left for work as usual. He then picked up his youngest daughter, Ada, from school at around 11:35 a.m. When they got home, he told Ada to go find her mother, Michele, while he started preparing dinner in the kitchen. Little girl ran through the house calling out for her mom, but received no response. Eventually, she checked their bedroom, but her mother wasn't there. Thinking her mom might be taking a bath, little girl headed to the bathroom. She stumbled upon a horrifying scene that would haunt her forever. She found her mother, fully clothed, lying face down in the bathtub. The water had turned a reddish-brown color. Shocked and terrified, she screamed and called for her father, Martin. When he arrived, he told Ada to go get help from a neighbor, while he worked to get Michele out of the tub. Then, Martin made a series of calls to 911. Some calls were abruptly disconnected, while in others, he claimed to be a doctor performing CPR on his wife, only to hang up again. These unusual behaviors prompted the 911 dispatcher to keep recordings. Shortly after the discovery of Michele's body, Martin's son Damien and Damien's girlfriend, Eileen, arrived at the house. Martin speculated that Michele might have overdosed on medication and passed out in the tub. However, instead of checking the medication himself, he insisted that Eileen flush the pills down the toilet and dispose of the packaging. The medical examiner concluded that Michele had died from a heart attack, and police reports classified her death as unnatural. On the afternoon of April 11, 2007, Alexis received a strange message from her father, Martin. He mentioned that Michele wasn't getting out of bed and asked Alexis to call her. When Alexis tried, Martin answered and said that Michele was now in the bathroom, not breathing, and that he had called an ambulance. He then hung up abruptly, without waiting for her reaction. Alexis, one of the last people to learn about her mother's passing, hurried to Utah. She was deeply saddened by her mother's sudden passing, and she suspected that her father might be responsible. Her first reaction was to check how much medicine her mother had left, as she knew how many pills her mother had taken and how many should remain. However, Damien's girlfriend, Eileen, had thrown the pills away before she could check. The medical examiner concluded that Michele had died from a heart attack, and police reports classified her death as unnatural. However, Alexis suspects that her father, Martin, is responsible for her mother's death. She confided everything to her older sister, Rachel, but no one wanted to believe that their father could harm their mother. Martin enjoyed taking risks and pushing boundaries. However, when he told his daughters to go to church and pray for God to send them a new nanny to care for the younger children, he crossed a line. Their mother had been buried only 3 days earlier, but the daughters obeyed their father and went to meet the nanny. The woman introduced herself, and Martin acted as though he was meeting her for the first time. In truth, he knew her very well. She was his mistress, Gypsy. She introduced herself as Jillian, but Alexis immediately recognized her as Gypsy Willis. Alexis warned her father, Martin, not to bring Gypsy into their home, but he ignored her. Less than a month after Michele's funeral, Gypsy moved in with he. She didn't behave like a nanny at all. She didn't care for the children, clean, cook, or do any household tasks. Instead, she spent every night in Martin's bed. Rachel and Alexis questioned their father, Martin, demanding to know why this so-called nanny wasn't doing her job. However, he threatened to kick them out of the house if they didn't treat Gypsy well. With the help of their aunt, Michele's sister, Rachel and Alexis cooperated with the police to investigate their mother's death. Meanwhile, Martin was scheming again. Gypsy is in debt, and Martin came up with a plan to solve it. He told her that creditors wouldn't be able to find her if she changed her identity, and he found a way to make it happen. Martin adopted a 16-year-old girl named Giselle, then sent her back to her biological family in Ukraine so Gypsy could steal her name and social security number. Then, he told Giselle that he would adopt her in the summer, but she never heard from him again. When Martin returned to Utah, he found a new home for his 3 other adopted daughters. A year later, Giselle's cousin, Gil, visited to check on her well-being. Upon arriving, Gil discovered that Giselle was living in extreme poverty with her biological family. Meanwhile, in the United States, Gypsy was living a comfortable life under Giselle's identity. Martin even altered his will, leaving everything to Gypsy. At times, he referred to Gypsy as his wife, while at other times, he claimed she was his daughter. When Gil brought the real Giselle back from Ukraine, Martin and Gypsy's fraudulent scheme involving fake documents was immediately exposed. In 2009, both pleaded guilty to federal charges and served time in separate prisons. While he was incarcerated, Rachel and Alexis tried to produce evidence of his involvement in the death of their mother, Michele. The chief medical examiner agreed to review Michelle's toxicology report. Although each drug in her body is not toxic when taken individually, their combination can lead to death. The examiner also concluded that Michele could not have taken the drugs on her own. As Rachel and Alexis investigated further, they uncovered the extent of Martin's lies. They discovered that his entire career was built on forged credentials. Adding to the scandal, Martin was still collecting disability payments from a brief stint in the military. Martin completed his prison sentence for fraud, forgery, and identity theft in July 2012. Perhaps he had plans to change himself, maybe become an astronaut, a nuclear physicist, or whatever his imagination could come up with. But he never got the chance. In August 2012, he was officially charged with the murder of Michele. Tragically, Damien, one of Michelle's children, wasn't there to support Rachel and Alexis during this time. A few years after Michelle's death ended his life. Rachel and Alexis testified against their father, Martin, thereby exposing all of his lies and fraud. It also came to light that he had begun sexually assaulting Alexis just 6 weeks after Michelle's murder. He was convicted of this assault in a separate trial. Years after Michelle's death, her family finally uncovered the truth they had been seeking. Martin had drugged Michele with substances that were nearly undetectable, then left for work to establish his alibi. In 2013, Martin MacNeill was found guilty of murder and sentenced. As for Gypsy, she was only charged with identity theft and has maintained a low profile since the trial. Michele and Martin's daughters are determined to completely eliminate their father's negative influence and figure from their lives. Alexis got married and adopted her 3 younger sisters. She also changed her last name from MacNeill to Summers, her mother's maiden name. Alexis explained that she didn't want to be Dr. MacNeill. She wanted nothing to do with her father. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Richard Beasley. Scott Davis, 48, relocated from South Carolina to Ohio after 15 years of work there. He sought a new job with higher pay to support his mother, who was facing financial difficulties. While searching, he came across a job posting on Craigslist that said, "We need someone to take care of a 688-acre property and feed the cattle. The position offers $1,300 per week, and you will live in a lovely 2-bedroom mobile home. Older, single applicants are preferred, but we welcome all candidates. This opportunity won't last long, so please apply immediately." Scott was drawn to the benefits highlighted in the job listing. Eager to find a good job, he planned to contact the employer soon. After hearing back from Richard Beasley, the person who posted the ad, Scott was quickly offered the position. They arranged to meet at Aeon's restaurant in Marietta, where Scott met Richard and his nephew, Brogan Raffi. They appeared to be genuine farmers, which made Scott feel comfortable and trusting. To earn Scott's trust, Richard arranged a preliminary interview with him. He proposed that Scott ride with him to the job site. They drove into a remote forest area where there was no cell phone reception. Richard suddenly asked Brogan, who was driving, to stop the car, saying that he needed to pick up some equipment for the farm near where they had shot the deer last time. After that, Richard and Scott exited the vehicle. Scott offered to help, and they began walking into the forest together. As they walked, Richard stayed behind Scott. Scott then heard a clicking sound and some mumbling from behind him. When he turned around, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Scott understood that he was the next target. Just as Richard was about to shoot, Scott quickly pushed the gun away, causing the bullet to hit his elbow. He then sprinted away while Richard pursued him, firing his weapon. Bullets zipped past Scott's head, and he heard trees and branches snapping behind him. "Oh God, he's going to kill me," Scott thought as he faced the revolver aimed at him. He was unsure of his destination, having never been to this place before, but that didn't matter. His main goal was to escape from Richard. Suddenly, Richard shot at him, hitting Scott in the arm and knocking him to the ground. However, before Richard could take another shot, Scott quickly got back on his feet and ran. Blood flowed continuously from his injured arm. In an effort to evade the gunfire, Scott veered to the right and slipped between two large tree trunks. He descended a small, slippery slope and almost lost his footing. It was autumn, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. Scott waved his arms to maintain his balance, ignoring the pain from his gunshot wound. He realized that falling could mean the end for him. As the ground leveled off and he began to run again, he heard the sound of a revolver firing again, right behind him. A bullet zipped past his head, just inches away. When Scott broke through the underbrush, he paused, disoriented and unsure. Dense trees and bushes surrounded him, nothing familiar to guide him. The murderer was closing in, crashing through the brush. There was no time to hesitate, he had to keep running. His legs trembled with fear as he heard the revolver fire again. The reality of his situation filled him with dread. He sprinted but stumbled, sweat blurring his vision. His head spun, and a loud ringing filled his ears. Exhausted, he finally stopped by a small ditch, hiding behind a tree to listen for the gunman. Scott felt the fear radiating from him as he groaned softly. His arm bled heavily, but he felt no pain. As his heartbeat steadied, he heard distant dog barks and crows cawing. He strained to listen for anyone searching for him, but the forest remained eerily quiet. After a long wait, he believed he had escaped and felt relief, but it took him 7 hours to feel safe enough to seek help. He eventually found a house and called the police, who arrived 15 minutes later. Scott recounted everything about the job listing, Richard, and the chase. He survived an 8-hour pursuit, but not all victims are so fortunate. He wasn't the first to apply for that job, hundreds had been hired before him. In August 2011, a 56-year-old man named Ralph Geiger faced hardship, unemployed and living in a camp in Aiken, Ohio. In August 2011, Ralph faced difficult circumstances after losing his job and having to move into a homeless shelter in Aiken, Ohio. He was determined to rebuild his life. After graduating from high school in the 1970s, he had moved to California to work with his father in an antique shop. He returned to Ohio in the late 1990s and started his own successful business, where he hired workers and earned a living by renovating homes and taking on various odd jobs. Unfortunately, when the economy entered a recession and the housing market declined, Ralph's business began to struggle. By the end of 2010, he realized he could no longer afford his rent, which led him to seek shelter in a homeless facility. Ralph lost his apartment and faced difficult times, but at least he didn't have the added responsibility of supporting a wife and children, as he was a lifelong bachelor. His close friend, Summer Rowley, who he considered like a daughter, is 26 years old. They have maintained a strong bond since he hired her to clean his house many years ago. Ralph has always been willing to help his friends. In the summer of 2011, Ralph visited the library every day to search for jobs online. By the end of July, he excitedly shared with Summer that he had secured a fantastic position managing a 600-acre livestock farm and taking care of the nearby houses. This job offered him a free mobile home and a weekly salary of $300. Summer was thrilled for Ralph and felt he truly deserved this new opportunity. Ralph appeared content as well, expressing that this job was a great chance for him to regain his economic independence. Ralph reached out to Summer on August 8, 2011, to inform her that he would begin his new job in Caldwell the following day. Summer wished him good luck and encouraged him to stay in touch. However, as days went by without any updates from Ralph, Summer became increasingly concerned. She attempted to call him multiple times, but each time she only reached his voicemail. By October, she learned that Ralph's phone number had been disconnected. Summer encountered someone else when she called Ralph's phone, which appeared to have been reassigned. Although she was concerned about Ralph, she didn't report him missing because she wasn't certain he was actually gone missing. Ralph had gone missing before but always returned. A similar situation occurred just weeks before Scott's case, involving 51-year-old David Pauley, who had faced difficult years. His marriage ended 2 years earlier, leaving him feeling unhappy and disillusioned. Starting anew in his 50s was particularly challenging for him. After his divorce, David found comfort in using his computer, often exploring various topics online. One night in October 2011, he came across an intriguing ad on Craigslist. In the Help Wanted section, he found a job listing for a farm caretaker to oversee a 688-acre farm in rural Ohio. The position offered a weekly salary of $1,300 and included the use of a free trailer on the property. David, who lived in Norfolk, Virginia, was curious and excited about a new opportunity. He thought taking a break from the city would be a big change, and rural Ohio, with its rivers, lakes, and wide open spaces, seemed like the perfect choice. Plus, having a free place to stay would help him save money. He responded to an advertisement and soon heard back. His twin sister, Deborah Bruce, kept in touch with him regularly. On October 22, 2011, David called her. He sounded very happy and excited as he shared the news about a job he found on Craigslist. He talked about a farm in Noble County, Ohio, and his dreams of starting a new life. His truck, filled with his belongings, was parked outside the motel. Deborah and David chatted for a while. Deborah wished her brother good luck and reminded him to stay in touch. David promised he would try, but he mentioned that there was no cell service at the farm. After they hung up, neither of them realized it would be their last conversation. Back to Scott's story, after Scott escaped a dangerous situation and reported it to the police, they tried to access the CCTV footage from the diner where he met Richard and Brogan. However, they encountered a problem. A fire had damaged the surveillance room the night before, making it difficult to recover the footage. The news reported on a man who posted a job ad on Craigslist. Instead of offering employment, he lured his victims into the woods and murdered them. This shocking story attracted significant media attention. Meanwhile, David's sister, who hadn't heard from him in some time, saw the news and contacted the police. They quickly determined that David was another victim of a man named Richard. The police searched the forest for clues related to an attempted murder of another victim, Scott. After 2 days, they found a baseball cap that Scott had dropped while running, and soon after, they uncovered a grave that had been dug for him. A K-9 unit was called in, and shortly thereafter, the dogs alerted the officers to something unusual. They discovered another body buried in the damp soil, which turned out to be David, who had been shot in the back of the head. A few days later, authorities discovered another grave with a body that lacked any identification. The sheriff's office in Noble County reached out to the FBI for assistance in finding out who had posted the job advertisement. They needed the FBI's help to trace the poster using the IP address and the advertisement's content. They determined that the job seeker was looking for someone very specific, someone who could vanish without drawing much attention. During interviews, if the applicant mentioned being married or having combat or martial arts experience, Richard would reject them. He was only interested in older men. He did not respond to any inquiries from women who applied. The victims, Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Scott Davis, fit the criteria set by the suspect. Another man, Timothy Kern, a 47-year-old divorced father living with his 3 sons, also matched these criteria. When he accepted a job in Ohio, he had to leave his sons behind. Timothy responded to the advertisement on November 10, just 2 days after Scott Davis's incident. On November 12, he visited his sons to say goodbye before heading to Ohio. After that, no one heard from him again. Once Timothy went missing, the investigation intensified. About 2 weeks later, the FBI traced the IP address of the ad poster to a house in Akron, Ohio, owned by a man named Joe. Joe claimed he didn't use Craigslist and that the ads were not his. He was unfamiliar with Richard but mentioned that a man had rented a room there. The police obtained surveillance footage from a diner, which showed a local man named Richard Beasley. When Joe viewed the footage, he recognized the man, but noted he had introduced himself as Ralph Geiger. The police were unaware that they had discovered Ralph, the first victim of Richard Beasley, buried in an unmarked grave. They also identified Brogan Raffi as Richard's accomplice and a high school student. Brogan was swiftly arrested and taken to jail. So who was Richard Beasley and why did he become a serial killer? Richard Beasley, born in 1959, grew up in Akron, Ohio, primarily with his mother, who worked in an office. After graduation, he became a mechanic but had a criminal history, serving 5 years in a Texas prison for burglary and another 7 years for weapon possession. He later returned to Ohio secretly, adopting a new identity. He created a facade of a compassionate man, pretending to be a pastor and going to church daily. However, his life took a turn when he became addicted to drugs following a car accident, and he eventually stopped working and lost his ability to earn money. Richard met Brogan at church. Brogan was the son of someone in Richard's motorcycle group. Richard decided to guide Brogan by discussing the importance of education and the dangers of drugs. However, despite his preachy attitude, Richard was actually involved in shady activities. He found an apartment near the street where he sought out vulnerable people, such as homeless people and drug addicts, to do shady things. The police eventually caught onto his schemes, forcing Richard to create a new false identity. He then shifted his focus to targeting homeless and unemployed individuals to steal their money and identities. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Brogan agreed to testify against Richard and reveal everything he had done. Brogan reported that he witnessed Richard lead Ralph, the first victim, into the forest, which was the same location where Richard later lured David and Scott. In his report, Brogan described the incident, stating that on a hot summer night, they took Ralph into the forest. He mentioned that he walked ahead while Richard and the others returned to the car and that he didn't join them. He recalled that suddenly, there was a loud noise, prompting him to go back to the car to grab a shovel. When he returned, he noted that Ralph was still there and that Richard had put Ralph's clothes and personal belongings into a garbage bag. Richard dug a hole that was about waist deep and roughly 4 feet wide and that they had difficulty placing Ralph's body in it. Finally, he added that they sprinkled lime over him as a sort of ritual. After Richard took on Ralph's identity, he dyed his hair, changed his clothes, and trimmed his beard to resemble Ralph. He found a job and took pleasure in his new life. Many of Richard's victims would arrive with most of their belongings in their cars, which he later sold. Scott Davis had mentioned that he would bring his Harley motorcycle to the interview. Richard ultimately targeted Timothy Kern as his last victim. Timothy, 47, encountered the same job search difficulties as the other victims. He found a promising job opportunity, but it required him to move to a different location. Timothy was reluctant to leave his children behind. Since his divorce in 1997, he had kept a strong bond with his ex-wife and their 3 sons, who all lived in Massillon. As a dedicated father and passionate baseball coach, Timothy prioritized spending quality time with his kids. When he couldn't be with them in person, he maintained their family connections through social media, particularly Facebook. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on his Facebook wall about an exciting job opportunity to manage a large 680-acre farm near Cambridge, Ohio. The position offered him a truck, housing with all rent and utility costs covered, and a generous weekly salary. However, he was concerned about the farm's remote location, which had no mobile phone service. Although he was apprehensive about leaving his family, the opportunity was too appealing for Timothy to ignore. He got ready to move on Sunday, although feeling a sense of sadness about being away from his cherished children. On November 12, Timothy went to his ex-wife's house to say goodbye and collect some essentials for his move. He spent valuable time with his sons before leaving the following morning. One of Timothy's sons received a loving message from him, but nobody realized it would be their final farewell. Unlike previous victims, Timothy was taken by Richard to a different location behind an abandoned shopping center in Akron. Brogan dug the grave, and Richard shot Timothy in the back of the head. The police were unaware of Richard's address, but they eventually arrested him. Richard didn't realize that Joe, the landlord of his rental home, had contacted the police, who then used Richard's IP address to locate him. As a result, when Richard called and messaged Joe, it assisted the police in tracking him down. He was arrested on November 16, 3 days after killing Timothy. Richard faces charges for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern, as well as the attempted murder of Scott Davis, along with numerous other charges. Richard Beasley and Brogan Raffi were tried in 2013 for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern. Brogan Raffi had the opportunity to accept a deal for a lighter sentence by providing information about Richard, but he chose to decline. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 counts of first-degree murder. Although Brogan remained silent, it was difficult to refute the evidence against him when Scott Davis, a key witness and victim, agreed to testify in court. There was also substantial evidence from the crime scene, including personal belongings and identification of the victims found at Richard's home. Despite his claims of innocence, the evidence clearly pointed to his guilt. Richard's trial took place later that year, resulting in the death penalty. He was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. In 2020, Richard Beasley was retried after a procedural error was found in his 2013 trial. He returned to the Summit County Common Pleas Court for resentencing, but the outcome was unchanged. He was again sentenced to death and received multiple consecutive sentences for his other crimes. At 61 years old, Richard appeared via video from the Chillicothe Correctional Institution. He was sitting in a wheelchair next to his attorney, Don Hicks, and both were wearing masks during the sentencing. Richard's other attorney, Donald Gallick, argued via video that adding multiple consecutive sentences was unnecessary for someone already facing the death penalty. However, Assistant Summit County Prosecutor Jack Cor insisted that Richard's sentence should remain unchanged. Judge Kelly McLaughlin of Summit County Common agreed with the prosecutors, stating that multiple consecutive sentences were needed to accurately represent the defendant's criminal actions. During the trial, Richard inquired whether he could reclaim a Celtic cross that had been taken during the investigation. He mentioned that the necklace had been passed down in his family and expressed his desire to give it to his newly married daughter, insisting that it was unrelated to the case. He stated that there was no reason for them to keep it, emphasizing that it was the only thing his daughter would have from him. It was noted that it was ironic for a murderer responsible for taking the lives of many innocent people to portray himself as a caring father. It remains unclear whether his treatment toward his daughter was genuinely good or merely a facade intended to influence the jury's perception of him as compassionate and incapable of being the serial killer he was charged with being. His mother was there, trusting in his innocence. However, due to clear evidence, the testimony of the living victim, and the confession of his accomplice heard in court, Richard had to face the consequences of what he had done. When the sentence was announced, Richard's mother stayed quiet and didn't say anything more. Richard appealed the decision but was unsuccessful. Since the trial, he has repeatedly asserted his innocence, but no one believes him. He is currently imprisoned at the Chilo Correctional Institution in Ohio, waiting for his execution date. Richard almost managed to evade capture, but his gun jammed, which allowed Scott Davis to escape. Had Scott not escaped and reported the incident, it's likely that the serial killer in the woods would have gone unnoticed, resulting in many more victims. The story begins with an online job ad that the victims responded to without thinking twice. The key takeaway is to be careful when you see job postings online. Make sure to research both the job and the employer thoroughly to protect yourself from scammers or dangerous individuals. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Valeria Vivano. Valeria Fern Vivano was born on May 29, 1996, in La Granja, a small commune near Santiago, Chile's capital. She was the youngest of 3 children in a modest family, with her parents Miguel and Jacqueline Vivano. She grew up with her older brother Michelangelo and sister Daniela. Her father worked for a transportation company, while her mother stayed at home to care for the children and create a warm family atmosphere. When Valeria started school, her parents decided to separate, which was a huge shock for her. Even though they continued to communicate after the divorce and her father is still very interested in his children's lives, including providing financial support, Valeria felt resentment towards him. They sometimes argued and went months without speaking, but they always managed to reconcile. Soon after the divorce, Miguel remarried, and Valeria gained 2 half-siblings. She maintained warm family relationships with them, as well as with her siblings, Daniela and Michelangelo. Jacqueline, on the other hand, never remarried. She focused on raising her children and later took care of her grandchildren. From a young age, Valeria showed a strong character, determination, and remarkable perseverance in everything she did. She excelled academically, participated in sports, and was always brave and fair, willing to help others, even when it put her at risk. She pursued a career in law enforcement because of her desire to help people in need and fight for justice. After finishing high school, Valeria enrolled in a police academy in Santiago, where she graduated with honors in 2016, becoming an investigator. At just 20 years old, she joined the Chilean police force. The following year, she started working in the bureau that investigates serious crimes in the capital. From the very beginning, Valeria demonstrated her commitment as a law enforcement officer and her passion for justice. She loved her job, carried out her responsibilities with care, and was always ready to respond to emergencies, even in the middle of the night. She would rush to crime scenes, pursue criminals, and sometimes had to provide emotional support to people who had lost loved ones. Her colleagues described Valeria as kind, cheerful, and friendly, while also recognizing her as a true professional and a dependable partner. Valeria served in the police force for nearly 5.5 years, during which she received numerous awards and recognition. She advanced in her career, gaining the respect of her colleagues and the admiration of her superiors. She also represented her department in Spain, spending about 2 weeks in Madrid on an official visit. She took great pride in being entrusted with such significant responsibilities. By 2020, she had been promoted to assistant inspector. In January 2020, Valeria welcomed a new member to her precinct, 21 years old Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales, who had just graduated from the police academy. Valeria took on the role of his mentor as he started his first job. A few months later, they became partners and initially got along well. Lionel comes from a wealthy and powerful family, with an uncle who is a high-ranking official. Having grown up in comfort and always getting what he wanted, because of this, he became quite selfish and believed that everything should go his way. Valeria noticed her new colleague, Lionel, who repeatedly tried to get her attention and asked her out several times. Each time, she firmly rejected him. Valeria was serious about her job and believed that workplace romances were inappropriate. She viewed Lionel as immature, not because he was 3 years younger, but due to his childish behavior. Despite this, she hoped to help him grow up. In July 2020, Valeria and Lionel attempted to catch robbers who had stolen money from a store's cash register. The criminals remained at the scene and opened fire, leading to a shootout in which Lionel fatally shot both of them. While this situation could have been avoided, Lionel's response was considered appropriate for apprehending the suspects. Nonetheless, this incident put a strain on the relationship between Valeria and Lionel. Valeria's last birthday celebration was on May 29, 2021, when she turned 25. The event took place at her mother's house and was attended by many guests, including family, friends, and co-workers. However, Lionel was not invited. Valeria decided not to invite his, as he had recently tried to pursue her again, and she wanted to avoid any awkwardness. When Valeria attempted to discuss with him, he only reiterated his feelings for her, which she preferred to keep private from her colleagues. Despite the big turnout, presents, warm wishes, and heartfelt congratulations, Valeria appeared upset, even as she tried to smile. She had recently argued with her father and they hadn't spoken in days. Valeria had hoped her father would come to her birthday, but instead, he only sent a brief congratulatory message and didn't even call. Jacqueline, her mother, recognized her daughter's unhappiness and understood the cause of her sorrow. Frustrated with her ex-husband's behavior, she believed he would eventually reach out to Valeria and they would resolve their differences, as they had in the past. Tragically, Valeria and her father never had the opportunity to speak again. Just 2 weeks later, on June 13, 2021, Valeria lost her life while on duty. She was working the night shift, patrolling the streets and checking vehicles as part of a manhunt for a suspect in connection with a crime against a young woman that occurred yesterday on the outskirts of the capital. Authorities were on high alert for a white Kia, suspected to be driven by one of the criminals. The suspect likely had a weapon and may not have been alone in the vehicle. Valeria was in a patrol car with her partner, Lionel, and they were being driven by Deputy Commissioner Felipe Gilardo. They spotted the suspect's vehicle and decided to chase it without waiting for backup. The officers successfully blocked the suspect's escape. Lionel and Vivano got out of their car with their guns drawn, ordering the suspects to surrender and exit their vehicle with their hands raised. Suddenly, a single gunshot was heard, leaving everyone confused about who had fired and from where. Valeria, holding her side, collapsed onto the asphalt next to the police car. Reinforcements arrived at that moment, and Valeria's colleagues heard the gunshot and saw she was injured, but they didn't fully understand what had happened or who had shot her. Taking advantage of the chaos, the criminals quickly fled the scene while first aid was being given to the wounded officer. Despite the swift arrival of medics and the efforts of her colleagues to control the bleeding, Valeria could not be saved. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where top specialists worked hard to save her life for several hours. Unfortunately, due to severe blood loss and damage to vital parts, she passed away on the operating table without regaining consciousness. When Valeria's family received the news, her parents, brothers, and sisters quickly went to the hospital. Unfortunately, by the time they arrived, had already passed away. Miguel was not only heartbroken but completely shattered, as he never had the chance to talk to and make amends with his dear daughter after their last small argument. He felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and was so distressed by the tragedy that he needed medical help to avoid a heart attack. Valeria was officially reported to have died while on duty during an operation aimed at capturing dangerous criminals. She was celebrated as a hero who sacrificed her life for the safety and well-being of others. Local media extensively covered the incident, with reporters highlighting her bravery and selflessness. The investigation into her death was conducted by experts from the Homicide and Major Crimes Division, where Valeria had previously served. They determined that she died from a gunshot wound to the abdomen, inflicted by an assailant in the direction of the suspect's vehicle that she and her colleagues were chasing. The situation initially seemed straightforward, as witnesses supported the narrative, making it appear that the case had been resolved. The only task left was to locate and hold the offenders accountable, who were still at large and possibly fleeing. Shortly after, the suspects were caught, attracting significant public attention. The criminals were identified as 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Capon and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was kept confidential due to his age. Both individuals had prior convictions for lesser crimes. The then president of Chile, Miguel Juan Sebastián Pinera, issued an official statement assuring the public that the perpetrators would face justice according to the law. However, something felt off. After the autopsy and necessary examinations, Valeria's body was returned to her family, who gave her a respectful burial in one of the city's cemeteries. Hundreds attended the funeral to pay their respects and offer condolences to her family. Jacqueline and Miguel described the entire experience as a nightmare. Among those who carried Valeria's coffin was her colleague Lionel, who seemed to grieve more than anyone else. However, other colleagues noted there had recently been some tension between them, to the point that Valeria hadn't invited Lionel to her birthday party. Shortly after the funeral, court proceedings began for the suspects who had been arrested the day after the incident and were currently in custody. Everyone believes that the person responsible for Valeria's death has been caught, and proving their guilt seems simple, especially when they begin to give confessions. However, it soon became apparent that the investigation had serious flaws from the beginning. Important details were missed, and crucial forensic evidence was minimized. The process was mismanaged, and higher officials tried to hide the identity of the actual person responsible for Valeria's death. About a month and a half after Valeria's death, the case took an unexpected turn. By the end of July, 2 employees were suspended for their alleged involvement in the incident that led to Valeria's death. On August 1st, the parents of Valeria were summoned to the prosecutor's office in the capital for an important meeting. They believed this meant that new evidence had come to light, and that the detainees would finally face the punishment they deserved. Miguel and Jacqueline were devastated to hear that Valeria was killed by a bullet fired by a colleague. Prosecutor Juan Carlos Carrasco personally announced the news, expressing condolences and apologizing on behalf of the entire investigation team. Valeria's parents were in shock. They couldn't grasp how it could have occurred. The fatal shot that killed Valeria was fired from a gun by one of her colleagues. A ballistics examination conducted that day confirmed this, but the results were inaccurately reported. The bullet taken from the body Valeria was incorrectly categorized with different characteristics, such as shape, caliber, and weight. Additionally, the bullet had passed through the body rather than being extracted from it. There was a mix-up in the forensic reports regarding the entry and exit wounds. The bullet did not enter through the abdomen and exit through the back as stated. In fact, the shot was fired at her back. Several pages from the autopsy report were missing, and others had been obviously tampered with. Furthermore, the detainees involved in the trial, who supposedly admitted their guilt and were about to be sentenced, began to file complaints. They alleged that their confessions were obtained through torture and intimidation, and that the firearm they had that night was not loaded. Valeria's story takes a sudden turn when she goes from a tragic hero who died on the job to a victim of betrayal, murdered by her own colleagues. In light of these new developments, the main suspects became Felipe Gilardo Era, the officer driving the police car, and Valeria's partner, Lionel Alejandro Contas Canales, who was in the back seat. Both were promptly suspended from their duties. On August 5th, it was revealed that the bullet that killed Valeria came from a service weapon. Later, an examination report showed that only Lionel had gunshot residue on his hands, making him the prime suspect. Interestingly, this information had not been disclosed earlier, as if it had been overlooked entirely. Several reports related to the ballistics examination and the pathologist's findings were mistakenly placed in an archive box, which was not properly reviewed. It remains unclear whether this was due to an accident, criminal negligence, or an intentional effort to hide important information. Now, the police officers involved in to capture the criminals that night are themselves regarded as suspects in the murder of Valeria. They, along with the previously arrested suspects, participated in a reenactment of the incident from that night. Felipe stated that from the driver's seat, he could only see Valeria, who was next to him in the front passenger seat and was the first to get out of the car. Lionel was sitting in the back and also exited, but the driver couldn't see his actions. Valeria had taken only a few steps when a shot rang out, she fell, and the suspect's car they were pursuing sped away. Lionel quickly ran to help Valeria. Lionel mentioned that he and Felipe exited the patrol car almost at the same time, but she had rushed forward as soon as the shot was fired. He firmly maintained that he did not shoot Valeria, and Felipe must witness and confirm this. He also confirmed that he was the first to reach Valeria and attempted to apply pressure to her wound. The testimonies from the witnesses varied, but the investigation revealed that Lionel was positioned behind Valeria at the time of the gunshot, and the bullet's path confirmed his location. Additionally, he was the only one with gunshot residue on his hands. New information from previously undisclosed reports and exam results led to potential motives for the crime. Lionel was arrested as the main suspect, while the previously detained young men were released with a non-exit agreement, since there were no charges against them. However, the reason for Lionel's actions is still uncertain. The primary theory was that the incident was a tragic accident. It is believed that Lionel, inexperienced officer, accidentally discharged his weapon while standing behind Valeria. In a state of panic, he tried to assist her, and when he returned his service weapon that day, he claimed he hadn't fired it. However, the truth soon emerged, and the young man's powerful relatives used their wealth and connections to try to cover up the incident. Because of that, the cleaned reports, missing documents, confusing evidence, and coerced testimonies from the detained individuals contributed. One theory, which Lionel himself partially confirmed, was that he was in love with Valeria and desperately wanted her attention. Unfortunately, his attempts only annoyed her, and she didn't even invite him to her birthday party, which the whole department attended. The shot in the back was his way of seeking revenge for this rejection. Another theory, suggested by Valeria's relatives, was that Valeria had uncovered something she shouldn't have, perhaps a corruption scheme or official misconduct. Being an honest and fair person, she would expose the culprit, leading to her being murdered to cover up the evidence. Young Lionel was chosen to carry out this act, with the promise that he would remain above suspicion. After Felipe was taken into custody, suspicions regarding Felipe remained. He was armed with the same type of service weapon, stood behind Valeria, and had the opportunity to fire the shot. Additionally, Felipe had a history of discipline for the unjustified use of a weapon during a criminal arrest, although no one was hurt in that incident. Because of this, he earned the nickname, the Reckless Shooter. Lionel's defense team quickly adopted this theory, claiming that Felipe accidentally shot Valeria. Since both Felipe and Lionel carried identical service weapons, it was possible that the guns were mixed up or intentionally swapped. Additionally, Felipe was inconsistent in his testimony, changing it multiple times. He later said he couldn't accurately recall the incident of that night because everything happened so quickly. However, no gunpowder residue was found on his hands, suggesting he was innocent. In response, Lionel claimed that gunpowder got on his hands while he was applying pressure to Valeria's wound, and that Era, who also assisted she, might have washed his hands before the examination. This explanation was not credible, as Valeria's blood stains were still on Philippe's hands, and it is impossible to wash away gunpowder without also removing blood. The trial and verdict have raised concerns about the competence of the investigation team, leaving Valeria's parents feeling desperate in their quest for justice. The new developments in the case led to public outrage and diminished trust in law enforcement. This story garnered attention not just from Chilean media but also from international outlets. As a result, several high-ranking officials were suspended or lost their jobs, including the head of the Homicide Investigation Department. Following a further investigation, Lionel was identified as the sole suspect, with all others cleared and designated as witnesses. In the spring of 2022, he was officially charged and remained in custody until the trial concluded. The hearings for the case began in March of the following year, and based on the evidence and witness testimonies, Lionel's guilt was clearly established. At first, the prosecution charged Lionel with intentionally murdering Valeria and aimed for the harshest possible sentence. But Lionel maintained that he would never hurt Valeria because he loved her. However, the bullet that killed her came from his gun. Lionel Alejandro Contas Canales was convicted of manslaughter and received a 12-year prison sentence, with the possibility of parole after 8 years. After the verdict was announced, the Vivano family voiced their disappointment, believing the sentence was too light. Meanwhile, Lionel and his legal team quickly filed several appeals. In February 2024, Valeria's family received a shocking update when the Supreme Court unexpectedly reduced the punishment for Lionel to just 540 days in prison, starting from the day he was arrested. This meant he effectively walked out of the courtroom a free man. In response, Valeria Vivano's family intends to sue the Chilean government, alleging that the judges acted corruptly. In a statement, Valeria's mother expressed her heartbreak, stating that the original 12-year sentence had felt too lenient, but the new decision felt like a mockery. She mentioned that it was as if she had lost her daughter all over again and that she no longer had faith in justice. Furthermore, she emphasized that their family was determined to hold the negligent Chilean government for what had happened. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Polly Klaas. Polly Hannah Klaas was born on January 3, 1981, in Fairfax, California, USA. Her family included her father Mark, mother Eva, and younger sister Annie. After her parents' divorce when she was very young, Polly and Annie lived with their mother in Petaluma, California. As for Mark, he had a new relationship after the divorce, and Polly got along very well with this woman. Overall, their family was very harmonious, and she spent time with both her mother and father, with no problems between them. Polly was a quiet and innocent child who had a few close friends but was generally very shy. However, she found confidence and joy in theater, participating in various school plays and community musicals where she often took the lead role. Her main aspiration is to become a talented musical theater actress. Aside from theater, Polly loves hosting and attending sleepovers with her friends, a regular activity shared among her close-knit group. On October 1, 1993, Polly asked her mother if she could have two friends, Jillian and Kate, over for a sleepover. Her mother agreed, and the two friends arrived at Polly's house in the afternoon. They had dinner together, and the evening went smoothly until Polly's mother went to bed around 9:45 p.m. due to a bad headache. She told the girls that she was going to sleep and asked them to wake her up if they needed any help at any time. After taking 2 sleeping pills, she fell into a deep sleep. The calm night was disrupted after 11 p.m., when Eva, Polly's mother, was jolted awake by the screams of Jillian and Kate. The two girls frantically told her that a man had broken into the house and taken Polly away. Eva made an emergency call to the police and then went to check on her other daughter, Annie, who was in her room, seemingly unaware of the incident. When the police arrived, they started questioning Polly's two friends, Jillian and Kate. The girls explained they were in a room, select on a Halloween costume and just having fun. As the night wore on, around 11 p.m., Polly suggested it was time to go to bed, and her friends agreed. She offered to get the inflatable bed she and her mom had set up earlier so the three could sleep together. However, when Polly opened the door to her room, a man was standing in front of them, holding a knife and not wearing a mask. Since Halloween approached, three girls initially thought man's threatening claims were a prank and burst into laughter. However, the man's facial expression quickly turned to anger, causing them to realize the situation was more serious. He swiftly forcing the girls into a room, where he bound their hands and feet with rope. When questioned about who lived in the house, all three girls, including Jillian and Kate, provided the same answer: Polly. Next, the man removed the pillowcases from the pillows and placed them over Jillian and Kate's heads, preventing them from seeing. He instructed the girls to count up to 1,000, assuring them that he would temporarily take Polly away but return her shortly. Unbeknownst to the man, the girls peered through gaps in the pillowcases and noticed his swift departure. Then, they attempted to release themselves from the restraints. After about 30 minutes of struggle, they managed to break free. Upon escaping the room, they immediately sought out Eva to inform her that her daughter Polly had been taken by the man. Jillian and Kate provided the police with a detailed account of the events. They also gave a brief description of the man, who had not worn a mask and no covered his face, allowing the girls to get a clear look at him. As a result, the police were able to create a sketch of the suspect to aid in the search. The investigation at Polly's house did not yield much evidence. Several footprints were found, but they all belonged to Polly, her family members, or friends who had visited the house recently. However, some unusual fibers were discovered on the carpet, which did not match the carpet in Polly's house. Further analysis revealed that these fibers likely came from the carpet of a vehicle. The police then analyzed the cars of individuals who were known to the family and had visited the house, but none of them matched the fibers. This led to the assumption that the fibers were from the kidnapper's vehicle. A palm print was discovered at the scene. At that time, fingerprinting and DNA technology had not yet advanced to the point where it could be compared to a database. However, the print was preserved for potential future use if a suspect was later identified. In Polly's room, a piece of fabric resembling silk was also found. The fabric had a distinctive pattern and appeared to have been cut from a garment with scissors. The police believed this fabric could serve as a valuable clue in the future. A hair was discovered, but its origin remained unknown since DNA analysis was not advanced enough to thoroughly examine it at the time. Polly's case generated one of the largest searches in the United States at that time. Thousands of volunteers joined the search, with 4,000 people combing neighborhoods, vacant lots, and large estates near her home. The police also attempted to locate drivers matching the suspect's description, but all did not bring any results. The police had a narrow 24-hour window to locate Polly after her disappearance, as chances of finding her alive would significantly decrease beyond that time frame. To expedite the investigation, they handed the case over to the FBI and launched an urgent search. However, as the days went by, hopes of a safe recovery Polly began to dwindle. During the investigation, police inquired about witnesses in the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual on the night of the abduction. Several neighbors reported seeing a suspicious individual lurking around the area, describing him as peculiar looking. They didn't think much of it at the time because they had no reason to believe the man was capable of committing a serious crime like kidnapping. As a result, they failed to report the incident to the authorities. The police shared a sketch of the suspect with the neighbors, based on a description provided by Polly's friends. The neighbors all recognized the man in the sketch. In a separate investigation, the police also questioned the teachers and staff at Polly's school to see if anyone knew the man or had any information about Polly's disappearance. Unfortunately, no one at the school had any knowledge about the man or the incident surrounding Polly's disappearance. The staff members all had alibis for the time in question, and none of them matched the description or resembled the sketch of suspects. The police have conducted a thorough and comprehensive investigation of the case. They comparing a fiber found in Polly's house to the car mats of teachers and school staff vehicles, but unfortunately, no matches were found. Over time, feelings of hopelessness and fear grew, not only for Polly's family but also for the authorities and the general public. Everyone is concerned about the threat this criminal may pose to society, so they demand that the police quickly solve the case. To gather more information, a $200,000 reward was offered to anyone providing information that could aid in locating Polly. This reward was funded by actress Winona Ryder, who also held a press conference to publicly appeal kidnapper for Polly's safe return. At the time, the internet was still in its early stages, and law enforcement agencies, including the police and the FBI, were unfamiliar with using the internet to locate missing persons. To assist in the investigation, 3 individuals from California took matters into their own hands. They created and posted a picture of Polly, a sketch of her suspected kidnapper, and an advertisement for a reward for any information that could lead to her safe return. Although social media platforms did not exist at the time, other online communication tools were available. As a result, approximately 25 million people in the United States viewed Polly's picture online. Initially, FBI investigators believed that the internet could play a crucial role in the investigation. Although the disappearance became increasingly well known, but internet users do not bring any valuable information. However, this has attracted many volunteers to help, and telephone switchboards were established with hundreds of information every day. This thing also bring hope in the families of other missing children, who reached out to Polly's family to support and assistance, hoping that by working together, they might be able to find their own missing children. The investigators were growing increasingly frustrated. It has been many weeks since Polly was kidnapped, and they had yet to uncover any leads. The identity of the kidnapper remained a mystery, and without any DNA evidence, they were unable to make a match. Not even a hair or palm print had been left found, leaving them feeling helpless. Finally, a new breakthrough in the case has come. A phone call was called to Polly's father, Mark. On the other end of the line, he heard a girl's voice that sounded uncannily like his daughter's. She claimed to be Polly and told Mark that she was being held at a hotel. The kidnapper had momentarily left her alone, and that's why she was able to contact he. However, before Mark could glean any more information, the girl hung up. Mark immediately rushed to the police station to tell the news. Unfortunately, the FBI at the time lacked the advanced technology to track a call that had already been disconnected. All they could do was wait anxiously for the kidnapper to make another move, so they can only sit and wait for a new call, hoping to trace it. A few hours after the first call, the same girl who had spoken to Mark called again. The police managed to trace the call, but found it odd that the location was not a hotel, as the girl claimed, but a residential neighborhood. When officers arrived and knocked on the door of the house where the call originated, they discovered it was a prank. It turned out a teenage girl, close to Polly's age, lived there, so their voices were similar. She explained that her friends had dared her to do it. The girl was not arrested or taken to the police station. Instead, her parents were advised to monitor her behavior and remind her not to joke about such serious issues. On November 28, 1993, nearly 2 months after Polly disappeared, police received a call from a woman. She reported that she found 3 suspicious items on a several-acre plot of land she owned. The police, along with the FBI, went to the location and found 3 critical pieces of evidence: a piece of silk identical to one in Polly's room, a pair of ballet shoes that Eva claimed were missing from the house the night Polly vanished, and some duct tape. These evidence led the police to suspect that Polly might have been in the area. Before all this evidence was discovered, on the day Polly disappeared, the same woman went to the police to report a problem. Strangers had been wandering onto her plot of land. She owned a lot of land, which was mostly forest, and had only one small house inside. Although there were signs indicating it was private property, there was no fence to keep people out, so many unknowingly crossed onto her land. Although her land had many intruders, but one particular out in her memory. On the night Polly was abducted, a man drove up to her house in his car, which got stuck in the mud. The nanny, who was caring for the woman's son, was the first to notice the man but didn't approach him because she was too scared. The homeowner also didn't approach him, as she thought he looked angry. They decided to call the police. When the officers arrived, they interrogated the man about why he was there. He explained that he hadn't realized it was private property and promised to leave quickly. However, he requested their assistance in getting his car out of the mud. The officers noticed that the man seemed very nervous, scared, and sweaty, and he also appeared to be under the influence of drugs. Since they were unable to conduct a drug test at the time and the man was not acting aggressively, they were unable to arrest him. The officers helped him out of the mud, and he eventually drove away. This man was Richard Allen Davis, born in 1954 in San Francisco, California. His childhood was troubled due to the violence inflicted by his parents. When he was 12, his parents separated. His mother completely disowned him, saying she wanted nothing to do with him, and left him with his father. Richard's father was very irresponsible, often leaving the house for hours or even days. Richard was frequently left alone, sometimes staying with neighbors and sometimes staying with some of his relatives. During his teenage years, Richard began engaging in criminal activities such as stealing and fighting, which led to several months in reform school. At 17, Richard committed a violent robbery that almost resulted in the victim's death. The judge offered him a choice: go to reform school or join the U.S. Army. Richard chose the Army but was dishonorably discharged in less than 2 years. As he grew older, his criminal record grew longer. Around the age of 20, he was sentenced to 15 years for robbery and kidnapping, but was released after 1 year on parole for good behavior. During that period, Richard was troubled by another accusation. Many of his friends suspected him of killing a 19-year-old girl named Marlene, even though the police acknowledged that she had left voluntarily. However, those close to Marlene believed Richard was responsible for her death, occurring the night they attended a party together. These were merely rumors, with no evidence to support them. When Polly went missing, Richard was having a difficult time, and he had no fixed address, so his whereabouts were unclear. The police distributed a special leaflet exclusively to officers, urging them to be extremely cautious. They withheld information from the media due to concerns that Richard might flee California or even the United States. On November 13, 1993, Richard was arrested while driving under the influence of alcohol. A police officer stopped him, and he failed a breathalyzer test. Upon checking Richard's name and picture, the officer recognized him as the suspect wanted in the Polly kidnapping case. The officer carefully informed Richard that he was being arrested for violating probation due to drunk driving. Richard complied and was taken to the police station. There, officers read him his rights and revealed that he was actually being held for the kidnapping of Polly. Richard was taken in for questioning. The investigation was careful and he eventually admitted to kidnapping Polly. His palm print matched exactly with the one found at Polly's house, and carpet fibers from his car matched those found in the house. Polly's friends were brought to the police station for questioning and immediately identified Richard as the kidnapper. Additionally, a piece of silk identical to one found in Polly's room was discovered in his car and on the piece of land of the woman who reported the incident to the police. All evidence pointed to Richard, leading he to finally confess. He explained that he had been using substances with friends that day and felt unwell. He decided to break into a house in a neighborhood to commit a burglary. Richard drove around until he reached Polly's neighborhood. Seeing an open window, he entered the house. He stated that he hadn't planned the incident, didn't know Polly or her family, and hadn't been following them. He was searching for valuables but didn't find much. As he was about to leave, Polly opened the bedroom door and saw him. Richard noted that she was very frightened and, in his panic, decided to take her. He stated that he put Polly in his car and started driving, eventually stopping in a vacant lot where he assaulted her. Afterwards, he got back into the driver's seat. When the woman and the babysitter spotted Richard on private piece of land, Polly was in the back seat. Police officers helped him retrieve his car from the mud, and at that point, Polly was still alive, which deeply frustrated officers as they believed her life could have been saved. After the car was pushed out of the mud, Richard drove down the highway, strangled Polly to death, and left her body there. Richard reported the exact location of the grave to the police, leading to a search that took place on December 4, 1993, 2 months 3 days after the girl was abducted. Polly's body was found in a grave beside the highway, dug by Richard himself. The forensic examination mainly confirmed the cause of death as strangulation, consistent with Richard's account. The date of her death was approximately the same day she disappeared. With all the evidence, Richard Allen Davis was put on trial for kidnapping, murdering, and raping Polly Klaas. During the trial, Richard had a chance to speak. Besides apologizing to the family, he accused Polly's father of sexually abusing her. Richard claimed that Polly had told him not to do to her what her father did to her. This accusation enraged Polly's father, who nearly attacked Richard, but the people present compartmented him. Richard's words shocked everyone, not only because he didn't apologize but also because they doubted the truth of his claim about Polly's father. On June 18, 1996, Richard Allen Davis was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering Polly Klaas. In August, he was sentenced to death. He tried to overturn the death sentence but failed. In 2006, Richard overdosed on pills in his cell but was revived and returned to prison. In 2009, his lawyer attempted to appeal his conviction to the Supreme Court but was unsuccessful. The Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kelly Dwyer. Kelly Dwyer was born in 1986 in Lincolnshire, a suburb of Chicago, to a loving family. In 2002, when Kelly was 16, her parents decided to divorce, but they remained on friendliness terms for her sake. The divorce was a traumatic incident that significantly impacted her life. A year later, she graduated from high school, but she unsure of her future plans. She took a break before college and worked part-time at a restaurant. In 2008, at 22, Kelly made a big decision to move to another city to start a new life. She chose Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which was about an hour from Chicago and reminded her of her hometown. The city was the largest in Wisconsin in terms of population, offering great opportunities. Kelly quickly made new friends, attended college, and got a job as a yoga instructor to pay for her tuition and accommodation. She also worked occasionally as a babysitter to tackle financial difficulties. As a child, Kelly loved visiting all the trendy, interesting, and popular places in the city. She enjoyed her life new and was making big plans for the future. The last time Kelly saw her father was a month before she disappeared, when he visited her in Milwaukee. At that time, Kelly had graduated and was working as a yoga instructor and sales clerk in a sports store. Her friends and co-workers admired her upbeat and fun personality. Kelly appeared to be happy and content with her life. She loved her job and had been in a relationship with Chris Sacco for a year. Chris was a 38-year-old successful IT manager at a trucking company. He graduated from Boston University in 2009 with a degree in international business. He had moved from New York City to Milwaukee for his job. Chris was a hardworking, decent person and have a good family. Both Kelly and Chris shared a love for sports and entertainment, seemed they like a perfect couple. Chris was already enjoying a successful career, a luxurious apartment, an expensive car, and a reasonable fortune that he had earned independently. During the investigation, detectives found that Kelly had no enemies or anyone wishing her harm. All her belongings were left at home, which ruled out the possibility of her running away. What was troubling was the complete lack of activity on her bank accounts and phone. This led police to speculate that she might be in danger. The last person to see her on October 10, 2013, was her boyfriend Chris, so the investigators asked him to come to the station for an interrogation. Chris explained that they met at his luxury apartment in Lafayette Towers, spent some time there, and left around 8 p.m. They then went to a small bar across the street from his apartment, where Chris and Kelly mingled with others and enjoyed a drink. In good spirits, they returned to his apartment around 2:30 a.m. and went to bed. Kelly left at 9 a.m., and they never saw each other again. Chris emphasized that he did not consider Kelly his girlfriend. They had an open relationship, and he was truly in love with another woman. This made the investigators curious. While Chris's story seemed quite believable, something about his words and behavior was suspicious, prompting the police to scrutinize him more closely. Detectives interviewed friends who were with Chris and Kelly that night. The friends confirmed that they all had a great time together. First, they went to the bar, and then they went outside, ordered a pizza because they were hungry, and ate it on a bench. Kelly was in a good mood and shared her plans for her day off, which included catching up on sleep, doing yoga, doing laundry, and resting. Later, Chris and Kelly went home, and they invited a friend over for another drink. The friend said she felt uncomfortable in Chris's apartment. She had a few drinks and later decided to leave. That night, Chris was smoking and chatting with a friend, while Kelly seemed a bit down. The friend thought Kelly was just tired and decided to leave the apartment to give them space. After speaking with Kelly's other girlfriends, the investigator discovered that the relationship between Chris and Kelly was not as good as it appeared. Kelly was genuinely in love with Chris, but he didn't seem as invested. Chris wasn't making any plans for a future together, which concerned Kelly. She suspected he might be having an affair and thought they might break up soon. As a result, Kelly felt there was no future with Chris and began looking for other options. She signed up for a dating site and began chatting with different guys, although she hadn't met them in person yet. Kelly's friends pointed out that they had seen bruises on her arms and neck. Curiously, when they asked about the bruises, Kelly always turned it into a joke, called it a crazy night, and immediately changed the subject. Her friends suspected these could be signs of violence, but Kelly never confirmed this thing. By that time, CCTV footage from Chris's house had been reviewed. It showed Chris and Kelly returning drunk to the apartment at night. But Kelly was never seen leaving. This footage contradicted Chris's claim that Kelly left his home at 9 a.m. the following morning. Turns out another friend of Chris had been in the apartment that night and said he'd done substances with Chris. With this information, the detectives got a search warrant for the apartment and went to Chris's house. Inside, they found various substances, pills, pipes, and other items, and arrested Chris for possession. The detectives also noticed something odd, a torn curtain in the bathroom. The curtain was missing, and the hooks where it hung were damaged, as if the curtain had been forcefully ripped off. During the interrogation, Chris appeared calm and confirmed that he had used substances, but he denied trading them. The police accessed Chris's cell phone and started investigating it. They found frightening materials, photos of a naked, unconscious girl on his bed, as well as a video of Chris sexually abusing the girl and seemingly strangling her. They suspicions that Chris was drugging the girl to take advantage of her. These materials were included as evidence in the case of Kelly's disappearance. The police went back to Chris's apartment with a cadaver-sniffing dog. The dog signaled at the bed and the bathroom in the apartment, and then pointed towards the front door. Later, it led the officers to Chris's car in the parking lot, as well as to some trash bins. By then, the investigators were already sure that the missing person was dead, and Chris became the main suspect in the case. She spent the last minutes of her life in his apartment, and then he took her body out and transported it in a car. It's still not known how Chris managed to discreetly get Kelly's body into the car without being caught by any of the 28 security cameras. While the police continued investigating, they checked Chris's computer and found explicit photos of babies. He was charged with possession of this material. At that time, Chris was out on bail awaiting trial, and investigators were still looking for evidence in Kelly's body to charge him. Remembering what Chris had told them about another girl he was secretly dating, detectives began to look into his double life. The young woman was named Megan, and she had been dating Chris for about 3 years. However, Megan doesn't know that Kelly is involved in Chris's life. The detectives went to talk to Megan and showed her photos of Chris's apartment. Upon examining them closely, Megan realized that some things were missing. In the bathroom, there was no shower curtain, rug, or several towels. In the bedroom, a large golf bag that was always kept there was missing. Based on the description, the detectives assumed that Kelly's body could have fit in such a bag. After reviewing all the building's entrances and exits, the police determined that Chris could have used an alternative path to reach the car without being seen. It seems he had thoroughly studied the house beforehand to plan this path. Parking lot camera footage captured Chris arriving with a large bag, which he placed in the trunk. He drove away from the house at 10:06 a.m. on October 11th, and at 10:08 a.m., Kelly's phone was permanently disconnected at the same location. Over the following 8 hours, footage showed Chris returning to the house multiple times, loading items into his car, finally he leaving at 6:16 p.m. He did not come back until the next day. When investigators asked him about the items he was transporting, Chris claimed he was moving his summer sports equipment to his mother's house. However, no one believed his explanation. That day at 7:30 p.m., Chris was supposed to meet Megan. However, she reported that he was over an hour late. Detectives suspected that during this time, Chris was searching for a place to dispose of Kelly's body, which explained his tardiness. Tracking Chris's movements was impossible because his phone had been turned off since the morning. Being an experienced IT professional, Chris likely knew that keeping his phone on would make police it easy to trace his location through phone records. Megan testified that Chris was acting differently that night. He appeared agitated and nervous. He was fiddling with his phone and said it wasn't working, which made him late. After their date, they went to Megan's apartment and stayed the night. Chris was so stressed that he couldn't sleep and was sweating heavily, so much so that Megan had to change the sheets in the morning. The investigators believed Chris was anxious because Kelly's body was still in his trunk, making him fearful of being discovered. He was trying to find a place to hide Kelly's remains. On the morning of October 12th, he said goodbye to Megan and departed. Earlier, he had tried to persuade Megan to urgently move with him to another city, Denver, but she declined. The police officers tracked Chris's location using the car's GPS and found that he was heading to a place called Cheese House, a cheese store located 130 kilometers from Milwaukee. It seemed unusual for Chris to drive such a long distance early in the morning just to buy cheese. However, Chris claimed he went there to purchase cheese for his parents, and he even had a receipt showing a purchase at 9:55 a.m. on October 12. His parents confirmed he had indeed brought them cheese. Still, it was hard to believe his story, because the same type of cheese could easily have been bought at a local supermarket nearby. The police suspected this area was where Chris had hidden Kelly's body. It was later revealed that Chris stopped at a sports store around noon on his way back and bought new sneakers, which raised suspicions. Detectives thought this was intentional. They believed Chris wanted to dispose of an old pair of shoes because it might have blood on them, or at the spot where he hid Kelly's body there may have been footprints from his old sneakers. Chris considered everything carefully and got rid of all the evidence, creating an alibi for himself. He is very good at analysis and wanted to commit the perfect crime, but the investigators were able to prove he was lying. The distance from the cheese store to the sports shop was about 80 kilometers, a trip he would have made in around an hour. So why did he show up at the store more than 2 hours later? All signs pointed to him doing something else for another hour, probably hiding the body. Police believe Chris hid the bag containing Kelly's body somewhere along the route and disposed of it there. The police were looking for Kelly, but without a specific location, the search was difficult and inconclusive. The entire 80 kilometers route was the search area, which was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Meanwhile, in November 2014, Chris Sacco went on trial for possessing illegal substances and explicit photos of children. He pleaded guilty and received a 19-year prison sentence. The roadside search continued, and they eventually succeeded. A local resident walking in a wooded area about 60 kilometers from the city discovered human remains near the road. Dental records later confirmed them as those of Kelly Dwyer. The resident quickly reported the discovery to the sheriff's office, who immediately suspected it was Kelly's body, which they had been searching for in that area for a long time. The discovery finally ended the search for Kelly, bringing some peace to her parents after a year and a half. Now, they needed to seek justice for her and determine the exact cause of death. The cause could not be identified from the skeleton alone. The medical examiner suggested that the girl might have been strangled, but the force was not strong enough, so the hyoid bone was not broken. There was no evidence at the location where the body was found, no torn curtain, mat, towels, or even a bag. However, the position of the body was unusual. The skeleton was found face down, with one arm under the torso and the legs bent, suggesting the body had been in a narrow space for some time after death. This further confirmed that Kelly had been hidden in that golf bag. Chris was seen on his home cameras with the bag and also driving down the road with it, disposing of the body, but all of this was circumstantial evidence. There was no direct proof that Chris had committed the crime, so the detectives continued to investigate the case. They were not in a rush because he was already in jail. It was not until 5 years after Kelly's disappearance that he was finally charged. The charges were negligent homicide and hiding the body. The police could not prove that the murder was planned in advance. They believed that on that night, the situation was similar to what investigators found in a video. Chris became intimate with her, lost control during strangulation, and accidentally killed her. He then tore down the bathroom curtain, rug, and towels, wrapped the body, put it in a bag, thoroughly cleaned the house, and disposed of the body. Chris claimed he was innocent of Kelly's murder. During the trial, CCTV footage was shown, along with a video from Chris's cell phone capturing the strangulation, and evidence from a canine inspection of his apartment was presented. Megan, who testified against him, stated he was unusually nervous and late for a meet on that day. Chris's ex-girlfriends also testified, saying he had a disturbing fascination with choking in rough sex, which frightened them. The defense argued that there was no direct evidence against Chris and that the prosecution just was based on speculation. They highlighted that Chris had no previous arrests or convictions, except for a substance possession case. He was a successful IT professional and valued employee with a respectable family, and they contended he was not capable of murder. Not all CCTV recordings were preserved before the trial, so the prosecution couldn't prove for sure that Kelly hadn't left the house. The defense even brought forward a witness during the trial who claimed to have seen a girl who looked like Kelly the weekend after she disappeared, in another man's car. They had seen her picture on TV as a missing person, but the witness wasn't completely sure it was her. All of this led the lawyer to hypothesize that Kelly left Chris' apartment and was then set up by one of her new boyfriends met through the dating website. The defense counsel argued that there is no way to confirm what exactly the dog detected because there is no video recording. As a result, which could be subjective. In contrast, the prosecution countered that the observe was conducted as objectively as possible, with many police officers present, and they all agreed on the results. At that time, Kelly had already stopped communicating, was not answering calls or messages, and was not active on social media, which was unusual for her, suggesting she was already dead. The prosecutor persuaded the jury that Chris was responsible for the murder. Chris was the only one who could have done it, and he cleverly planned everything and disposed of the evidence, leaving no direct proof of his involvement. The jury deliberated for a long time but ultimately found Chris Sacco guilty of first-degree negligent homicide and concealing the body. Kelly's family and the prosecution requested the maximum sentence of 48 years in prison, while the defense attorney asked for the sentence to be reduced to 22 years. In December 2018, Chris Sacco, aged 43, was sentenced to 31 years in prison, 26 years for manslaughter and 5 years for concealing the body. He is currently held at the Green Bay Correctional Facility in Wisconsin. He will be eligible for parole in 2065 at the age of 90. Chris attempted to appeal the sentence, but his appeals were denied. Kelly's family is satisfied with the sentence, as it effectively means he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jean Domenico. Jeanine Domenico was born on August 29, 1959, in Massachusetts, USA. After graduating from college in 1987, she moved to Shore, New Hampshire, where she married Anthony Kaczynski and started a family. They had 2 children, a daughter named Nicole and a son named Charlie, born 2 years apart. Unfortunately, after Charlie's birth, Jean's marriage began to deteriorate. Anthony became aggressive and abusive, which ultimately led to their divorce. After the divorce, Jean worked hard with Nicole, who had a developmental delay. Because of Jean's dedication, Nicole learned to manage her condition by the time she started school. However, after enrolling her children in school, Jean faced financial difficulties and wanted to work more. Fortunately, a neighbor helped care for the children. Despite her busy schedule, Jean prioritized her children and spent all her free time with them. When the children turned 14 and 12, Jean began working at an insurance agency about 20 minutes from home. With her heavy workload, she could no longer pick them up from school, but the teenagers were able to get home on their own, which helped them become more independent. In 2000, while working at an insurance company, Jean met Chris McVan. He was attracted to her professionalism and deep love for her children. They began dating and eventually became engaged, but Jean chose to postpone their wedding plans. She lived in a small house that was too small for the 3 of them, while Chris had a spacious house of his own. Although Chris was eager for them to move in together, Jean asked them to wait until her children were older, wanting to build her life with them without the added stress. Chris was very understanding and sometimes slept over, but he preferred to leave early in the morning to avoid having to queue for the bathroom. As Nicole's daughter turned 16, she entered a typical rebellious phase and started a relationship that Jean disapproved of. At the same time, Charlie began associating with a bad crowd, becoming hot-tempered and aggressive. It appeared that his transition into adulthood would be even more challenging than his sister's. Jean worried greatly while she was at work, leaving the children at home alone. She was particularly concerned because their biological father had been a domestic abuser who frequently resorted to violence, and Jean feared that her son might follow that same path. On August 6, 2003, the family's day started like any other. Chris woke up at 6 a.m., kissed Jean, and went to work, looking forward to dinner that evening. Jean finished work at 5 p.m. and went home, while Chris was still busy in a meeting. When Chris's meeting finally ended around 7 p.m., he called Jean to check in before they went out for dinner, but he was surprised when she didn't answer. He thought she might be out walking the dogs or busy getting ready. Before leaving the office, Chris noticed he had a missed call from his daughter Nicole, along with a long voicemail. In the message, Nicole sounded worried and frustrated because she had not been able to reach her mother or brother. She said she was going to be with her boyfriend William. The way she spoke was so chaotic that it was difficult for Chris to understand how serious the situation was. Chris decided to drive to Jean's house to talk things over. When he arrived, he quickly noticed Jean's car in the driveway, indicating she wasn't out walking the dogs, as they were barking in the backyard. Chris thought Jean should have been home for at least 2 hours and had enough time to finish her chores before dinner. However, the house was dark and there was no sign of her. Concerned and not getting any response to his calls, Chris used his spare key to unlock the door. Once inside, he found the house eerily quiet, with the lights off as if the power had been cut. He called out for Jean as he moved through the dark rooms, but there was no reply. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he spotted Jean lying motionless on the kitchen floor. Chris feared she had passed out again due to her new strict diet, as she had fainted several times before from hunger. Worried she might have hit her head, he rushed over, shook her gently, and called her name, pleading for her to wake up, but she didn't respond. In the dark, Chris saw a puddle of blood beneath Jean. Panicking, he took out his mobile phone and called the rescue service. When the dispatcher answered, Chris's voice trembled, and he mumbled in confusion. He told the operator that he thought Jean had fainted due to her diet and had hit her head, which explained the blood. Without any light, he couldn't grasp how serious the situation truly was. As he waited for the police and medics, Chris sat in a chair, trying to calm down. He failed to notice the bloodstains scattered across the kitchen or the broken and disordered furniture around him. On the refrigerator, there was a note from his daughter. It explained that she wouldn't be joining the family for dinner because she was going out with her boyfriend. The note was signed William and Nicole, expressing their love and gratitude for Jean. Throughout the ordeal, Chris stayed in contact with the 911 dispatcher. However, due to his panic and shock, he struggled to follow the instructions and couldn't check for a pulse. While on hold waiting for the police, he still clung to the hope that Jean was alive. He knelt beside her, cradled her head, and gently fixed her hair. He kissed her and whispered that he loved her. In that moment, he felt how cold she was and noticed her vacant, glassy eyes. Chris came to the painful realization that Jean was dead, but he couldn't accept it. The nearest police patrol was just minutes away from the Jean's home. When the officers arrived, they were confronted with a gruesome scene. 43-year-old Jean lay in a pool of her own blood in the kitchen, having been brutally stabbed and beaten. It was clear her death was violent. Understandably, Chris, her lover, became the primary suspect. He was visibly shaking when the patrol arrived, struggling to speak after discovering her body. Karen Smith, a 29-year-old mother of 3 and a frequent babysitter for Jean, saw the disturbance in the yard and went to investigate. While Jean's fiancé was in shock and crying, the police spoke with the neighbor, hoping she might have heard or seen something during the attack. Unfortunately, she couldn't offer any useful information. The police cordoned off the area around the house, preventing local residents from entering the secured zone while they conducted their investigation. When local residents learned about the murder, they were heartbroken. Jean was a kind and vibrant woman, making her death particularly shocking to those who knew her. Neighbors felt unsafe knowing that a dangerous killer was still at large. At the crime scene, police uncovered evidence of a horrific attack involving multiple knives. One knife was found in the sink with a broken handle, while the blade lay on the floor near the victim's body, suggesting it broke during the assault. Another knife was discovered in the backyard, and a bloody palm print was found on the refrigerator. A trail of blood stretched from the kitchen to the living room, leaving even seasoned police officers stunned by the severity of the crime. Police noted that the killer appeared so angry that they did not care about the evidence they left behind. This type of behavior often indicates that the perpetrator had a personal connection to the victim and may have harbored a deep grudge against her. After a brief examination of the scene, the officers returned to Chris, who was still in shock and struggling to answer even basic questions. They watched Chris closely, as he was the prime suspect due to his unusual behavior and the circumstances surrounding him. Once Chris was able to speak with the officers, he shared his own suspicions. After realizing that Jean's death was not an accidental fall, he believed that only one person could be responsible. In his opinion, Jean's ex-husband, Anthony Kaczynski, was abusive and had a troubled relationship with her. The police recorded his statement and spoke to Jean's neighbors and relatives, who confirmed that Jean had indeed had problems with Anthony. She had previously mentioned being afraid of him. It was known that the teenager had a bad relationship with his mother. He felt angry with her because they had become estranged from his father and other issues. After hearing the conversation, Charlie believed that his father could not have harmed his mother, so he reported this belief to the police. He quickly called his father to clarify, and Anthony assured Charlie that he had nothing to do with the incident. Later, Anthony's alibi was verified. Chris said that Jean was so afraid that she wouldn't even keep knives in the house, fearing that her son Charlie might use them in future conflicts. In fact, Jean was so afraid of sharp objects that she refused to even keep them in the house. Before she started dating Chris, she had confided many times that she felt like she was about to die from cold weapons. Surprisingly, this strange obsession turned out to be a premonition. After Chris gave her a set of knives, Jean had a hard time agreeing to use them. At first, she locked the set in her bedroom when she went to sleep. Gradually, she got used to it and started using it recently. Before the tragedy, Nicole and Jean's arguments began. Nicole increasingly clashed with her mother, who still treated her like a child. One of the main obstacles was Nicole's relationship with her boyfriend. Jean was not sure Nicole was old enough to be with Nicole's 18-year-old bad boy, William. At the time of the massacre, they had been dating for over a year. They mostly communicated on the internet. Jean and her daughter disagreed on this issue. Nicole met William in May 2002 when she was 14 years old, and the guy was 17. They began to correspond, and their connection immediately strengthened. Despite the fact that the young man lived in Connecticut with his mother, the couple seriously intended to date and develop a relationship. The young man was born prematurely in 1985 into a dysfunctional family. Once, when he was still very young, his father quarreled with his wife and struck her hard in the face. Life in a cruel and indifferent family had a negative impact on the William. From a young age, he displayed aggressive behavior, frequently breaking things and often hurting his sisters. During this time, his father's inappropriate actions forced their mother, with 5 children to care for, to seek refuge in a motel. One tragic day, the family's house caught fire, and he watched helplessly as their belongings were consumed. He feared that his father was trapped inside. The sound of fire truck sirens haunted him for many years. His mother observed that after the fire, he changed significantly. William began to frequently discuss death, exaggerate his childhood experiences, and express a wish to die to her. As he grew older, William began to exhibit cruelty and aggression, often directed at strangers. When he was 8 years old, he experienced a devastating loss when 2 of his best friends died in a car accident. This trauma deeply affected him, leading to the development of psychological disorders that resulted in his admission to a psychiatric hospital for 30 days. During his treatment, he struggled with anger towards his mother, which he expressed during phone calls. While at the psychiatric clinic, William was prescribed medication to help manage his aggression, but this had a negative impact on him. He became reliant on these drugs to control his behavior. His mother believed that repeated hospital stays were the only solution to his mental health issues. However, doctors were unable to provide a clear diagnosis, rendering their efforts largely ineffective. Starting at the age of 9, William's problems intensified. In 1994, he attacked one of his sisters with a baseball bat and damaged various items in the house. This led to another hospitalization, and similar incidents occurred 2 more times. Throughout these admissions, doctors tried to understand what disorders he was facing. Another significant episode happened when he was 13, during which he frequently ran away from school and initiated fights. The longest duration he spent in a psychiatric clinic was an entire year. After that, William continued to attack his sisters and mother, often using his favorite weapon, a baseball bat. Following a lengthy treatment at the clinic, he was prescribed a new medication aimed at stabilizing patients with schizophrenia. From that point on, William's behavior became noticeably more manageable, bringing relief to his mother and sisters. However, in 2001, about a year before he met Nicole online, he had another outburst of anger. He threatened to harm himself, prompting his mother to call the police. He was admitted to a psychiatric hospital again, where he stayed for about a month. When William started dating, he and his girlfriend began to communicate regularly through the internet and phone calls. This long-distance relationship turned out to be quite expensive, with Jean quickly noticing the high costs. Their frequent calls resulted in bills of $500 and even $1,000. The age difference in William's behavior became major concerns for Jean, who was already worried about the relationship. Jean was concerned about her daughter's future and the potential risks of her relationship with an older man. Meanwhile, William was charming Nicole with compliments and showing sensitivity, which easily swayed the inexperienced schoolgirl. Jean suspected that William was intentionally trying to make Nicole fall in love with him in order to push for a more intimate relationship. Jean recognized that this kind of behavior often comes from manipulators, and she feared her daughter might become a victim of someone like him from the internet. As a result, she tried to slow down the progression of their relationship. When Jean began to receive large phone bills, she banned Nicole from using the phone. This decision upset Nicole and led to an argument. In response, William wrote to Jean, expressing his admiration for her and thanking her for raising such a wonderful daughter. He asked her permission to continue seeing Nicole, saying that he was serious about their relationship. They had plans to move in together and start a family, and they both wanted to find jobs. However, instead of feeling happy about this, Jean was filled with fear. She felt that William was dangerous. Nicole convinced her mother to take her to Connecticut to meet William in person. Her mother saw this as an opportunity to end their relationship, believing that seeing the bad guy in person would turn Nicole off. She planned an 8-hour trip with Nicole. Unfortunately, her plan backfired. After the meeting, Nicole fell even more in love with William and ignored her mother's warnings about him. Nicole cried for 2 hours on the way home over the breakup, leaving Jean shocked at her daughter's immaturity. Nicole pleaded to transfer to a school in Connecticut so she could be near William. But Jean made it clear that until Nicole turned 18, she would live with her mother and younger brother. This became a source of tension in their relationship for the next 15 months. William got a job at McDonald's, helping his family financially while also trying to win over Nicole's mother. Meanwhile, Nicole struggled to live with her mother and brother, away from her boyfriend. Nicole and William both write letters to Jean, but their attempts seem childish and unconvincing. Jean remains adamant that Nicole must stay with her until she is an adult. William got his driver's license and saved enough money to buy a car, which made him excited to visit Nicole. In August 2003, he fulfilled his dream and went to see her. Nicole's mother hesitantly allowed him to stay for just a week so they could spend time together. Because Jean worked long hours, she let William stay at her home when she wasn't there. Their neighbor, Karen, occasionally checked on them throughout the day, claiming she was protecting them from getting too close. This, of course, was naive. One day, Nicole asked Karen to buy a pregnancy test, revealing that she and William had grown intimate. Karen was shocked and intended to tell Jean about it, but she never got the chance. Tragically, Jean was found dead in her home. The forensic expert concluded that she had been brutally beaten with a baseball bat. The evidence, including her injuries and the disarray in the house, indicated a prolonged struggle. In addition to numerous blunt object injuries, 53 stab wounds were found on Jean's body, especially on her arms, suggesting that these were defensive wounds during an attack. The most severely injured areas of the Jean were her head, face, neck, and upper chest. The attacker intended to kill her. Forensic analysis revealed 28 stab wounds concentrated in the neck, face, and upper body, indicating the seriousness of the injuries. The forensic expert noted that the Jean suffered for a prolonged period. Despite multiple injuries, only one stab wound to her arm struck a vital area, rendering her unable to move or call for help. This ultimately led to her losing consciousness and dying during the assault. The attacker also punctured her lung, causing her to suffocate as it filled with blood. When Chris learned of the severity of the attack, he was devastated. At that point, he regained consciousness and was willing to cooperate with the police. He provided a DNA sample. Chris went on to blame Jean's ex-husband, Anthony, for the attack, saying that Jean had expressed fear of Anthony, claiming that he had threatened to kill her. In the evening, Nicole and William returned to the house but were stopped by the police cordon and not allowed onto the property. The officers were initially unsure of their identities. Once they recognized the young couple, the police detained them and took them to the station for questioning. William appeared very anxious and restless, explaining that his anxiety stemmed from mental health issues. His mood fluctuated rapidly. At times he was friendly and willing to talk, while at other moments he became aggressive and withdrawn. This erratic behavior raised the officers' suspicions. Nicole and William were interrogated separately. William stated that he last contacted Jean around 2 p.m. He mentioned that they had walked together in the supermarket and planned a family dinner with Jean and Chris that evening before he was supposed to return to Connecticut. He claimed he knew nothing about the attack. In contrast, Nicole began crying immediately, making it hard to understand her. She became even more distressed when she learned about her mother's death. After a while, she calmed down enough to explain that they had spent the day in the supermarket. However, her account had significant inconsistencies compared to William's, which led police to suspect that he was not being truthful. As a result, they requested DNA samples for analysis. The main issue was Nicole's story about buying a shirt that William claimed to have worn all day, but it was missing when he was arrested. He also couldn't explain the whereabouts of the new shirt, which raised suspicions. This was odd, unless he got rid of it because it was stained with blood. When the police noticed this detail, William became visibly more nervous as they asked him probing questions. Eventually, he grew aggressive and refused to talk, citing his mental health problems. The police then asked when he last took his medication. At first, he said he hadn't taken his last dose due to being held and questioned, but later he changed his story and admitted he had not taken his pills for several days. The young couple seemed to be hiding something and begin to feel pressured. Nicole tearfully shares her problems with her mother, while William confesses that he has many burdens on his conscience that he feels he cannot reveal. They reveal that William has been planning to take Nicole with him when he leaves home, a plan that Jean is strongly against. William constantly pressures Nicole. This manipulation makes her feel responsible for their troubles, and she often blames her mother for forbidding them. Eventually, the couple managed to escape from the police station, but they were caught again 2 days later. This time, Nicole and William confessed to killing Jean and were questioned separately. At first, William joked about her death, but it quickly became clear he was serious. He suggested they mix prescription drugs into Jean's morning coffee, thinking she would either overdose or fall asleep while driving, leading to a fatal accident. Unfortunately for them, their plan did not succeed. William came up with a new plan. He decided to add bleach to the cream that Jean used in her coffee. However, Jean noticed the strong smell and refused to drink it, which led them to think of more extreme measures. They considered setting Jean on fire in a car, but William's childhood fear of flames made that plan unfeasible. They then thought about blowing up the house with her inside, but that plan also didn't work out. Ultimately, William chose to confront Jean with a baseball bat, a weapon he had favored since he was a child. Initially, Nicole opposed this violent idea, but after some consideration, she changed her mind and agreed. On the day of the attack, William waited at home with the electricity turned off. Meanwhile, Nicole stayed in a car parked at a nearby store, making sure Chris wouldn't come back. When Jean entered the house, an argument broke out between her and William. In a sudden moment of escalation, he grabbed the baseball bat, marking it as the point of no return. The confrontation quickly turned violent as he swung the bat. Despite Jean's efforts to defend herself, he continued to strike her. Then, he picked up a larger knife and inflicted even more injuries. When police asked William how many times he stabbed Jean, he said it was about 8, but that was a significant understatement. In reality, he inflicted 53 stab wounds on her. After the brutal incident, William tried to clean up the house before going back to the car where Nicole was waiting. Visibly shaken, he urged Nicole to go home and get him a towel to clean up the blood, and she agreed. Nicole entered the house, unfortunately stepping over her mother's body. She left a note on the refrigerator, took a towel and a knife she found, but then discarded both items before going to get William a change of clothes. The police collected evidence at the crime scene, including bloody handprints on clothes and shoes. William and Nicole were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. From the start, William's lawyer highlighted his mental health issues. However, according to the prosecutor's office, William was aware of his actions during the attack and had meticulously planned the crime. Nicole convinced the prosecution to accept a deal. As part of this agreement, she later testified against William, resulting in her receiving a prison sentence. However, she could reduce her sentence by 5 years if she completed an educational program while incarcerated. In 2005, William's trial began. Nicole claimed her actions were motivated by innocence and love, but she had played a role in the tragedy of her mother's death. The defense highlighted William's family problems. It was known that his mother drank heavily during her pregnancy, which may have contributed to his premature birth and many of his developmental challenges. The prosecution argued that Nicole had incited him to kill his mother. Nicole was aware that her boyfriend struggled with anger management. According to the defense, she exploited William for her own gain. William argued that he should be placed in a mental hospital instead of prison. However, the trial did not support this request. The jury found William Sullivan guilty and the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole.